Hi, welcome everyone. My name's Dan McDowell, and I'm president of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. Welcome to our first Thursday program. All politics are local is the name of our program tonight, and we have some dynamic speakers with us that we'll go through and introduce them here in just a few minutes. But before I do that, I wanted to welcome everyone and introduce the board of directors that we do have on the call tonight with us. And we have Carol Becker, our treasurer. Hi, Carol. Any words of treasury importance that for the audience tonight? Oop, let me.
No, I was trying to unmute myself. We welcome you here, and as treasurer, I can offer that we have ways to donate to our organization if you want to help us keep presenting these presentations. You can go to scpaflorida.com, and the information is there on how to mail a check, how to use your credit card, any of those options.
Great. Thank you, Carol. Also joining us, who's coming on live, actually, as I speak, is our Vice President, Karen Houston. And I'm not sure if Karen has got the opportunity to take herself off of mute yet. And welcome, Karen. There she
Looking
is.
for it.
Great. Thank you.
Trying to get the mute.
So another very important board member that's with us, as all of our board members are important, is Janice Moran. And the reason why I say she gets super recognition, gets mentioned twice tonight as not only a board of director, she is also our producer of this program tonight. And so thank you, Janice. Any opening remarks?
No, other than I really appreciate our speakers coming. I'm looking forward to them. I think that we've got two smashing people to talk to us, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Thank you again for being here.
Excellent, excellent. We're also honored with our former president, which is Phil Stasek. Welcome, Phil.
It's great to be here, everybody. It is wonderful to see you. This is such an important topic at a really critical time for our country. Our nation is facing a threat that we've all been watching, threat to our democracy. And it's so important that we have people that are a populace that is educated and informed and motivated to vote, and then the support structure to support them, encourage them to vote. So it is great to have this topic. Again, wonderful speakers. I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And I do also want to mention and give great appreciation, thanks to our production help today, which is Beth Ants, who will be who's hitting the recording button and helping us out tonight, and will place this recording on YouTube. So if you want to go back and look at the program or tell others, we greatly appreciate it. It will be on our YouTube channel. So thank you, Beth. Well, our next election is November 4th. And, local voting is just as important as our national. I can say that as somebody who is a part of our local elections. And I do think that, our local elections do matter, and they do have impact on our on a lot of things that, we operate in our daily life. So we'll be talking about some of the local elections, I believe, as the night goes on. And I do want to mention that we have a couple other board members that may join us late, and I may jump in and introduce them as well. But for right now, is there any elected official that is on the call that I need to recognize? Looks like we're okay. What we do, and let me just quickly kind of walk through this tonight's program, or at least the agenda with you quickly, and that is that we go through it. Next step is announcements, and you have an opportunity to have the floor to a minute or so to say who you are and what you represent and why it's important you want to make a special announcement. So we'll open that up here now.
I'm
I'll jump in
Sure.
then now. Good evening, everyone. This is Suzanne Taylor. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of the Space Coast. And just to point out two very relevant things to tonight, we have candidate forums scheduled for the only two elections in Brevard County on November 4th that I'm aware of, at least. Tuesday, October 21st is a candidate forum in Melbourne Beach, and Thursday, October 23rd is a candidate forum in Indy Atlantic. Both start at 6 p.m. in their respective council chambers. So hopefully anybody who lives in Indy Atlantic and Melbourne Beach comes out to see those candidates. All candidates have indicated they're going to appear. Thanks, Dan.
Excellent. No, thank you, Suzanne. And I failed to introduce my co-host tonight, Suzanne Taylor, and she will speak to you here in just a moment. So my apologies for that, Suzanne, and definitely my bad. So with the program tonight, how we typically the format is each of our speakers, Suzanne will take the time to give you a quick bio of them, and then they will speak for 15 to 20 minutes. We typically have a timekeeper, but that's usually if we have, 4 or 5 speakers. Tonight we have 2, so I think we've got ample time for each of our speakers to share their presentations. And after that, then we'll let them speak and then open it up for a Q&A, followed by a closing comments of some action items. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne and let her introduce our first speaker or any other comments she'd like to have here in her opening remarks. Go. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me first say who you are. You are the president of the League of Women's Voters, and active in presenting nonpartisan meetings that educate citizens on public affairs, sponsoring and co-hosting the candidate forums, as you had mentioned. And Suzanne is an attorney, and she focuses on issues that relate to fairness and democracy, helping people learn what they need to vote or what they need to do to vote, making their vote count in a county-wide basis. So with that said, Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I have the pleasure of introducing our two speakers tonight, our two presenters. The first will be Tim Bobanek, who is the Brevard County Supervisor of Elections. Tim was appointed as the Brevard County Supervisor of Elections by Governor Ron DeSantis in 2022, and then subsequently elected to serve the voters of Brevard County as the Supervisor of Elections in 2024. Prior to that, Tim served as Director of Information Technology and Election Services for almost 10 years in Brevard. And prior to that, he was Director of Information Technology for Hillsborough County Supervisor Elections. Tim is a Master Florida Certified Election Professional, and he's overseen 36 elections throughout his career. He's a lifelong Floridian, attending the University.
All right, looks like Suzanne may be frozen there.
Of South.
Suzanne,
did I freeze?
Yes, you froze for a little bit there. Sorry about that.
To the end, please join me in welcoming Tim Bobanek.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I appreciate. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs ups or something like that? Okay, good. So thank you very much for the opportunity to come out here and present, on this very important topic about, all politics is local, why voting is so important in these local elections. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this extremely important topic of participating in local elections, specifically these municipal and special district elections. We went back and started pulling voting turnout history. And what we see is that, we have pretty good turnout in your general elections. Obviously, the presidential elections show the highest turnout. This last election, we had about an 82.7% turnout overall, which was higher than the state average. And here in Brevard County, we definitely, do a good job exceeding that voter turnout. But when we start getting into midterm elections and then primaries and specials is where we really, really see a significant drop in voter participation. it's one of the goals that we're trying to clean up and fix. We started a program last year, and we really kicked it off with the younger voters. It's a program called Your Vote is Your Voice. And we have been going to the high schools in Brevard County, and we've been hosting assemblies. And they come out and we talk to these younger voters about why voting is so important, how your one vote always makes a difference, no matter what you think, whatever, no matter what you hear. And we started targeting these because the 18 to 25 year olds have the what I call the worst turnout. They're really good at registering to vote, and a lot of them are captured when you go to the driver's license or the DMV, and you get that, and you have that motor voter that really picks them up. They tend to not show up to vote, and so that is such a really critical thing when we look at the 18 to 25 year olds, and we see a 15 to 20% turnout rate on those. And even in presidential and large elections, well, sometimes we see only 50, 60% turnout, whereas 55 and older, and especially 65, 70 and older, are turning out at much higher rates, up in the high 80s to low 90%. So, we're going out to these schools, and we're trying to make it known that you really need to, if you want to express your opinion, if you want, there's something that touches your life every day, that, government touches your life. And we use examples of school board races, of constitutional amendments on the ballot, and everybody's got an opinion about something. And so we really, really push to emphasize that if you want to make your voice heard, if you want your feelings and your elected officials to be acting in a way that you want, then the best way to enact change is to show up to the voting booth and actually vote. Going back and looking at and what we really saw, which was very interesting, is the special elections that we just had here in Brevard County. We had a primary and a general special election to fill vacancies that kind of started with the congressional special elections, the congressional appointments that we had, or we had members of Congress that were appointed to cabinet positions, and that kind of created this whole domino effect of special elections, where we had a Senate and a House race, state Senate, state House race. And in those elections, in the primary election, we only had a 21% turnout, 21.71% turnout. And, that Senate race, the Senate primary and the House primary, those were only open to Republicans because there was only one Democrat candidate from each, for each race. So they didn't have a primary. But then we get to the general election, and in the general, we had a 17.4% turnout. And, the state Senate covers 90% almost of Brevard County, 85 to 90% of the county. And obviously the state house covers a smaller portion. But the fact that, we are making decisions, that 17.4% of the electorate decided who our next state senator was and state representative. And we did a significant amount of voter outreach. Obviously, groups like the League and Space Coast Progressive Alliance, all the different groups on all spectrum, really tried to get the voter turnout, but people just really aren't paying attention to these special elections. And so what we're trying to do is just really push that. The other thing that we see is exceedingly low turnout in these odd year municipal and special district elections. And I got to say, we're off to a bad start here on the municipal we have here. And it started with candidate qualifying. So half the cities in Brevard County have a midterm, an odd year election. You have cities like Cape Canaveral and some of these others that have elections. And interestingly, in the city of Cape Canaveral, they had 2 open seats, and they only had 1 candidate even qualify. So, that was a race that anybody could have just walked in, filled out paperwork, and you would have been a Cape Canaveral City Council member. And in their case, it goes down to their city charter, and they'll end up appointing somebody to fill that other role. So in this election, the only cities that are having elections is the city of Indialantic, or actually town of Indialantic, and the town of Melbourne Beach. And we also have an election in Barefoot Bay, but Barefoot Bay also, for one of the first times in a while, also didn't have a contested candidate race. And so the only election that they're going to have is a referendum on pickleball. and it's going to be whether they want to spend money on expanding and building pickleball courts. So we're kind of dubbing this the pickleball election for them. But in the town of Melbourne Beach, which is any voter that lives in precinct 305, and the town of Indian Atlantic, precinct 506, we do have races. And, one of the things that I always really push, whether it's a presidential election or whether it's the further down the ballot you go, the more those candidates, those elected officials touch your lives on a daily basis. What people that are elected in Washington and in Tallahassee, the decisions they make are such larger global things. But you have city council members, county commissioners, school board members, things like that are making your lives that affect your everyday life. And so we're really trying to encourage participation. A lot of times when we see those city council races and they're buried at the bottom of the ballot, and after they're the last candidates to be listed, just before the special district candidates, a lot of times we see voters just leave those blank. They come in, they vote for president, Congress, U.S. senator, things like that, and they kind of almost get ballot fatigue by the time they get down to those city candidates. And a lot of times they just don't know who those city candidates are because there's so much publicity around the president or governor or these higher level offices. Now, as far as my office goes, we treat every election as if the president's on the ballot. We do all the same processes and procedures. It's just a matter of scalability. So in this election, we're only going to have 3 precincts open, and we're just trying to get the word out as much as possible. Now, one big thing that always affects turnout is mail ballots. And as everybody may or may not know, the legislature once again has tinkered with the mail ballot laws and has taken it back down to a mail ballot request is only good for 1 general election cycle. Now, I've been election since 2009, and I've seen it go from 2 cycles to 1 cycle to 2 cycles. Now we're back to 1 cycle again. And we're really trying to get the word out because this is the one that the voters just don't understand. And we really struggled with this in the special elections. Voters had just voted by mail in the presidential election in 2024. And here we are just a few months later, and voters are wondering, why am I not getting a mail ballot? Now, we did an outreach like we always do. And we'll do another one before next year. And we will send out a mailer to voters who previously have voted in the general election, but who don't have a request on file now. Now, for this upcoming election, we just today dropped 1,174 mail ballots. So that's what we have for these 3 precincts is 1174. And overall, we have about almost 38,000 mail ballot requests going into next year's elections. Now, that number actually is a little bit higher than we would normally have, and I do give credit to the special elections for generating interest and kind of re-enrolling some of those mail ballot voters. And as we get closer to the election sometime next year, we will drop another mailer to remind voters that they need to re-up their mail ballot requests and that it will be good for all of the elections through the end of 2026. Looking at that mail ballot turnout, we tabulated, I think we sent out about 100,000 ballots in the 2024 election. So we're just over a third now of where we were. That's kind of where we were, I would say, on track with where we were 2 years ago. After the 2022 election, we had to start all over again and rebuild the voter rolls and voter list back up to, or the mail ballot list back up to the number that we got. In 2022, we sent 150,000 mail ballots out. But we had just under 100,000 cast. So there was some cleanup when that first happened, but it's definitely a challenge for the supervisors to get that communication out. And that's why we rely on all of our partner organizations that are out there in the community to really get the word out. And if you go to our website, Vote Brevard, it is prominently displayed that you need to request your mail ballot. Now, in order to request a mail ballot, you have to provide your full name, date of birth, your Brevard County residential address, your Florida driver's license, or the last 4 digits of your social security number. And then you can specify to receive ballots for all elections, or you can specify just an individual. Let's say you're going to be traveling during the time of the primary, but you want to show up in person at early voting or election day for the general, you can absolutely do that. You can request it for a single election, although the vast majority of voters who request a ballot do it for all of the upcoming elections. So, we're going to be working on that outreach to try to get that list up, to get that awareness out there. Because every one of those mail ballots, I don't, as the supervisor, I don't push any one method of voting versus the other. I try to equally educate voters on all three methods of voting. Leading up to the mail ballot deadline, we have billboards out. We really make a push for that. Then when early voting starts, we kind of switch gears because we can't send mail ballots out anymore, and we focus on making sure everybody knows, we got 10 early voting locations throughout the county. You can vote at any location. We have directions and wait times to all of our early voting sites. And then I really tell people election day is your last chance to vote. It's your last opportunity. And I encourage voters, if you think that there's any reason why you might not make it on election day, and you could have a medical emergency, you could have a flat tire, a sick kid, a million different reasons, and that's your last chance. So, in Florida, in a presidential year, we send out ballots 45 days before every election for the overseas military and civilian voters, and then they have 10 days to receive them back. So multiply that times 2 elections for the 10-day count and the primary, and we have 155 days of active voting where ballots are moving in a presidential election year. So, with all of the options for mail ballot, early voting on election day, you really can't tell me that there is not an opportunity to vote. Now, the last thing I want to close with, if I have a couple more minutes, is I want to talk about the myth of my one vote doesn't make a difference, because I do hear that all the time from especially students, and I hear it also from family members who it's like, I got, one member is a Republican, one's a Democrat, so we're going to cancel each other's votes out, so let's just not vote. In the 36 elections that I have overseen in my career, I've had 3 elections with an exact tie. And the most recent one was in the 2024 general election. We had an exact tie for the city of West Melbourne. And it was an unusual race. We had a vote for we had 5 vacancies because we had 3 seats up, and then we had 2 additional members resign to run for other seats. So, when you have a vote for 5 and you have 7 candidates, that's just ripe for the possibility of a recount, and we were completely prepared for it. And when the election night results came in and we saw everything, we weren't at all surprised, but it was a little shocking to see exactly how close it was. When we did all of our provisional ballots 2 days after the election, everything was tabulated. We had a 1 vote difference between the 5th and the 6th place candidate. We did all of our mandatory recounts, and the recounts actually put the race to an exact tie. And it's important to note, when you do recounts, it is very common for votes to change a little bit here and there because you're putting a closer scrutiny on undervoted and overvoted ballots, votes that have marginal marks. And so we actually had an exact tie. And on the 10th day, when we certified the election, and that's the last day that we can receive ballots from overseas military and civilian voters, on that last day, we had 1 ballot that came in. It happened to be a West Melbourne City Council ballot, and it had 1 vote for a candidate to break the tie. And that's what determined the election. And the truly heartbreaking story, and I've kind of said this a lot to the students that we've been talking to, is after the meeting, after we certified the election, a young lady came up to me. It was the daughter of the losing candidate. And she told me that she had just turned 18 not too long ago. She registered to vote. She didn't actually get out and vote. And that could have been, or actually would have been, the tie vote. It would have put it back to a tie. And ultimately, after recounts, if you have a tie, the statute says you have a game of chance. And in our office, we flip a coin. So it would have at least given him a 50-50 chance. So it's the story that I really love to tell. It's a heartbreaking story, but it's a lesson to be learned that if every single vote absolutely counts and every vote matters. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Dan.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it again. And Suzanne, if you want to introduce the second speaker, that'd be great.
I'd be happy to. Our second speaker is Brad Ashwell, and Brad is the Florida State Director for All Voting is Local. He has more than 20 years of state and federal legislative experience with nonprofit advocacy groups, working to improve election administration systems and voter access. Brad has worked for the Florida Alliance for Consumer Protection, the State Voices Florida Citizen Table, and the Florida Public Interest Research Group. Brad is a Brevard native, and he graduated from the Florida State University with a bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary social science. And I have to say at this point, go Knowles, because I have a freshman. My son is now a freshman at FSU, and I think I signed something that said I'm required to say that. I signed a lot of stuff. So Brad is the director of All Voting is Local, which is a nonpartisan organization that fights on the ground in 8 states, including Florida, for free and fair elections. And please join me in welcoming Brad Ashwell.
Thank you. Thank you. And, we're always looking for help and interns. So if you have somebody at FSU, let me know. It's great to speak to the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, and it's a hard act to follow. You have a great supervisor of elections in Brevard. Tim Bobanek has just been stellar, and he's widely respected by other supervisors and advocates around the state. So you're in good hands. And it's a pleasure for me to be here. Like Suzanne was just saying, I grew up in Brevard, lived in Palm Bay for years, lived in Melbourne for years, even lived in O'Galley when that existed. And then really spent my formative years living in Melbourne Beach, where there's now an election. So, it's kind of like coming home. But, just to tell you a little about All Voting is Local, because it's not a legacy advocacy organization. It's a relatively new organization. It started about almost 7 years ago. I've been with the organization 6 years. And in that time, we've gone from 8, well, maybe 10 staff to close to 70. And we basically focus on expanding free and fair elections. We believe that our country works best when more voices are heard. We believe Floridians and Americans in general deserve a powerful democracy-centered movement that reflects the values, priorities, and leadership of our communities. We're at a critical time right now as we face I would say the threat of a backsliding democracy into a more authoritarian regime. We're very focused on creating a pro-democracy, pro-voter movement that can push back on that and promote ideals that we all believe, I think. To further all that, it's really essential that we educate our communities and build trust in our democratic process. I think one of the most corrosive and problematic trends I've seen since even before 2020 has been this attempt to chip away at our trust in elections and make us question the process itself, the actors running those elections, any sources of information where we might learn about candidates. And it's really something we all have to work together to push back on. I'm here today really to talk about how local elections are so critical. I don't know if I could beat all the information and data and the emphasis that Supervisor Bobanek just laid out, but I mean, I think the importance really is that local elections really have the most direct impact on your daily life, whether it's school, water, waste, emergency services, all of it. It's also where your vote's going to have the most influence. It's also where budget dollars are not infinite, and it's really important for you to have a say in where those go and tax decisions. It's also a place where we're basically where your council members are more accessible and more accountable. So in short, it's a place where you can make the most difference. It can also lay the groundwork for bigger elections. A lot of what we do year round is, and especially with local elections, is to really set up systems and exercise the muscles that are going to be vital in those bigger elections. For us as a nonpartisan democracy organization, that often means setting up election protection, nonpartisan election protection, rapid response systems, recruiting folks as monitors and training them and making sure they know how not to, feed into a problem, how they know how to respond to a problem, who to respond to, how to deal with it. Um, it's also a great way to get people engaged as poll workers. I know I don't know how Supervisor Babanik is doing, but I mean I know most supervisors around the state are always looking for people to actually get involved as poll workers, and we try to help with that wherever we can. But you know, as you know, one of the things I'm hearing a lot from progressive friends is this sense that the next, maybe not the 2026 election, but the 2028 election, this feeling that it's going to be rigged and there's no hope. And I just want to say that's really doing their job for them. The folks that could potentially rig an election would love nothing more than for you to sit out and be passive. This is really a time to be active, engaged, speaking out, educating people about how to, responsibly engage in their democracy, and really fighting back on all the misinformation too. And the best way we found to fight misinformation and disinformation is inoculation, to get out ahead of it, to make sure people know how the system works. People who don't know how the system works are the most vulnerable to, Instagram and Facebook posts with you name it, garbage. So we try to be a good source of information. We hope you'll be a good source of information. But honestly, the best source of information is the election officials themselves. And that's another reason it's great. I know I'm just like showering praise on Supervisor Babanik, but it really, in a sea of options where people can get information, a lot of us are just another choice in the menu. It's really the election officials who have the official information and can refute a lot of the misinformation. Um, you know, and Supervisor Vanek alluded to some of the issues with vote by mail. Um, Unfortunately, officials at the state and national level are pushing some policies that really focus on shutting people out of the process rather than bringing them in. And I think that's really the dichotomy where we're we're focused on the side of bringing people into the process, expanding access, and making sure people know the rules, making sure the rules are fair, and that people can participate. So I just wanted to flag a few of those issues. One was already mentioned, and that's the vote by mail requests. It's really important for you to check just to make sure your vote by mail request is on file. If you know, but if you're in question, you might as well just check online or submit one again. Similarly, we're seeing a lot of little different issues relating to registrations, and we're increasingly emphasizing the importance of, checking your registration, making sure you're active, making sure your address is correct, making sure your party affiliation is right, all those little things so it doesn't catch you on the back end. Another one issue that's popped up, I guess it was really a law change that went into effect or started being implemented July 31st of last year, but the DMV has to randomize numbers on licenses now, of at least 4 digits on every license. So anybody who's renewed or replaced their driver's license or state ID since about the middle of last year has a new number, and that number isn't automatically forwarded from the DMV to local election offices. So one thing we're really trying to emphasize with folks is to update that information. And we one of our partners, Vote Riders, has some good one pagers and images you can share on social media. If you'd like that, I can share that with you. And I know a lot of supervisors have been getting information around with that too. I mean, Brevard might be, some counties have good access to David, the DMV's database, and it's not as much of an issue. And that might be the case in Brevard, but it's been an issue in a lot of other counties. It's just another thing to check. Just update your registration, make sure it's the right ID information, and you're good. Make sure you're active. The other thing I wanted to put on your radar is a more federal issue. It reared its head last legislative session at the state level in a bill that didn't pass, but it's a requirement that's not law anywhere. It's not a barrier that anyone's facing yet, but it's a requirement that folks prove documentary proof of citizenship when they're registering to vote. And it was in uh, an, a, an executive order, a presidential executive order earlier this year. Now there's a petition being considered, I guess, by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, and we are encouraging folks to submit comments. The problem is that it requires people. The petition itself is requiring, or it's asking for, is requesting a very restrictive, limited interpretation of this, where voters would only be able to use a passport to prove their citizenship. A lot of people don't have passports. Take some time to get them if you don't have one. There's a cost associated too. But that could affect a lot of voters if that did go through. So there is an opportunity to submit comment to the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission, by October 20th. And if folks are interested, we do have, bullets and information on that, and we can steer you to the right site and help in any way possible on that. But I just want to put that on your radar. It's something that a lot of groups are concerned about. I guess just a couple of other things to put on your radar. We in the pursuit of building a pro-democracy movement, we do have local coalition spaces. You have your own, the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, but there is also a Central Florida All Power to All Voters coalition. Any of you are welcome to be a part of that and participate in those calls. I'm happy to connect you. We have a listserv where we, just share out information we're getting sometimes. And one such document was our Intro to Democracy guides. We recently just revised those and translated them in English, Spanish, and Creole. And we're happy to share those with you. But it's a tool we're usually sharing with people who are just getting into the process. A lot of students, a lot of folks who might focus on other issues like environmental issues or other things, but are kind of new to pro-democracy work. And I think that's it. It's really a pleasure to work with you all. As far as helpful words, I would just say, again, now is not the time to be silent. Every election, every local election is a chance to participate, to get others participating, to educate them about the process, and to just cut through all the negativity that's being spread.
Excellent. Thank you, Brett. Tim has his hand up, but before I let him, well, why don't you go ahead, Tim?
So there was just one or two things I wanted to dovetail off of Brad's comments. One is the driver's license number is definitely something that I'm very involved in. We had our legislative delegation meeting earlier this week in Brevard County, and I spoke about the importance of getting that corrected. And for those who don't know, when you go to the tax collector's office, DMV, if you get a new driver's license, replace it, and nothing's changing on your voter registration, when they ask you, do you want to update your voter registration, they're saying no, because there's nothing to update, there's nothing to change. And if they don't update, we don't get the new driver's license number. If they do say they want to update, then yes. And now I've spoken to our local tax collector, Lisa Cullen. Her staff is encouraging people when they get those new driver's license numbers to push that change. But we know we're not getting them. So when I addressed the legislative delegation on Tuesday, I said, we're trying to work this administratively with the Department of State and the Department of Highway Safety Motor Vehicles, because the systems already talk. But we might need a legislative push to get that over the hurdle. Sometimes it takes the legislatures mandating something in statute to get those things moving. Now, I will tell you that if a voter goes to a polling place and has a new driver's license and presents that driver's license at the polls with our electronic poll books, if it doesn't see a driver's license match, it's still using other data that's contained in the barcodes on the driver's license, and it'll then revert to a name search. So we're not anticipating seeing huge, from the voter check-in standpoint at the polls, because our poll books, at least the ones that we use, they do multiple search iterations and to make sure that we are capturing the correct voter. And our staff has the ability to do a manual lookup, which sometimes is just as fast as putting that ID down, getting the camera to read it, and so forth. So we've really been training our poll workers to expect all of that. when we get to the polls. But I'm expecting little impact on that side. The biggest impact is we have to validate the driver's license number on mail ballot requests and now petitions as well. And so when those numbers don't match, it becomes a significant burden, because then we have to go to the David system, as Brad mentioned, which is the driver's license database, and where they have the old number and the new number. And then we can look up to see, does this number match, before we can then accept that mail ballot request or petition. So, that's something that is probably the most impactful side. And it might be a little bit self-serving because it affects us in the elections office, but it's something that needs to be corrected and fixed. And so we are working with the legislature. I'm actually on the executive board of our association, and so I'm also on our legislative committee. And so we are really pushing that, and it's going to be on our legislative priorities that we're pushing this year. The other thing I wanted to talk about is, as Brad mentioned, this struggle with election integrity and the misinformation that's out there. On our website at votebrevard.gov, I've got a tab on the left that says election integrity. We are always pushing that we are your trusted source of information when it comes to anything voting. And I realize that, there's going to be some people who just don't trust me and trust the elections office. And that's why we implemented our clear ballot audit system, where we do a 100% audit of every race and precinct and ballot. We literally do this by scanning every ballot a second time. We scan the ballots twice and compare them between the two systems. I've never had an election, even in the presidential, I've never had an election that was less than 99.99% accurate between the two systems. That has significantly helped quiet down some of the conspiracy theory stuff with voting equipment, voting machines. I still have some people, but I regularly interact with the election integrity community that's out there. And and Kimberly in my office will tell me it's like a passion of mine to win them over. To just give me 20 minutes, give me 30 minutes in the office, tell me your theory, what it is, let me throw some facts at you. And if I can't convince you by that time, then the problem is the facts are getting in the way of a good story. And so I pride myself on really being able to talk about that with the public, with the voting public, and just being very open and transparent. I think that's just a very important thing. So what we really tell our voters is, you're going to see stuff on social media all the time. You're going to see on Twitter or X or whatever, you're going to see all the crazy stuff. And then we start getting phone calls. And, we tell people, authenticate before you pontificate. Call our office before you repost some theory about some voting machine or voter roll maintenance. Just call the office. We are more than happy to talk to you and explain exactly how things work. We can get very detailed. I tend to talk too much when I go to some of these events, and Kimberly's pulling me off stage saying your time's up. So I just kind of wanted to emphasize that I do thank you, Brad, because it is something that we still struggle with, is the trust in elections, and we're just trying to build that back up.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tim, and as well as Brad, for your presentations. And since I have the floor, and I know Phil has his hand up here, and so he's going to have the second question, because I'm going to ask the first question real quick, and that is the redistricting portion of that. How significant is that in an election, especially when time is of the essence here? So either of you.
So that's a great question. And right now what they're looking at up in the legislature is the redistricting for congressional districts, which are much larger than, let's say, state house seats and so forth. I don't know how it's going to impact us right now here in Brevard County. Just from what I'm hearing, I think they're focusing on other areas. However, whatever area you touch, if you're going to change the boundaries of congressional districts, it's going to affect the surrounding counties, because you've got to pull from one area to add to another. And so we're keeping a close eye on it. We are prepared. I will tell you that there isn't a single county that budgeted for new voter information cards for this fiscal year to have to send out new voter cards. And the law says if your districts change, I've got to send out a new voter card. I'm hoping, Brevard is contained in one whole district. I'm hoping that doesn't change. I'm hoping that the number doesn't change, that it stays the same congressional district that we're at now. But it's something that we are very closely monitoring. but I am hearing it's a very likelihood that it'll happen.
And we're kind of in a similar posture. We're watching it closely. There are definitely actions happening around the state. I believe in a couple days, and then again a week later, just opposing it. I know a lot of people have been speaking out at legislative delegation meetings around the state, and our concern is really on the back end, as Supervisor Babanek was saying, just making sure if sites are changed, if precincts are changed, and the redistricting has that kind of downstream effect that voters know what the changes are. I will say, I mean, just looking at what they're already talking, I mean, who knows what they will do? I don't even think they know what they'll do yet. But if at least with what they're saying right now, it's looking like they're mainly tweaking South Florida districts, so it might not reach up as far as Brevard. I guess let's hope. But yeah, I mean, let's just, it's very political. No one asked for this. We believe strongly that voters should pick their lawmakers, not the other way around. So we look at this as a very aggressive, anti-democratic effort.
Excellent. Thank you, Brad. Phil, you're up.
Daniel, I thought you were going to go first. I'll tell you what. First, I want to say thank you so much to Tim and to Brad, Suzanne. This is really, really important stuff. Of all the things that people could spend their evenings doing, this is probably one of the most important things that anyone can do. So participating in elections is critical. Tim, thank you very much for over all these years. You have always been there to come out to our events, to help educate people, to help motivate people. And I really, really, really appreciate that. Brad, again, it's great to have you aboard, and we look forward to seeing you in the future as well. My question to both of you, and this is to both Tim and to Brad, and that is that, kind of hits on what we were just talking about, and that is the political interference with our elections. The playing this game where people don't know whether their mail ballot is, whether they have to redo their mail ballot or not, and when it is, and whether it's 2 cycles or 1 cycle, or whether they know anything about their mail ballot being canceled, their mail ballot status being canceled, makes a lot of people frustrated and disconnected. The hearing that there are going to be gerrymandering districts across the country in order to try to help one party versus the other. This is as anti-democratic a thing as that ever happens, and it puts people off. And if finally oh golly, the essence is, we've got so many things. The president has made, that's what I was going to say. The president has made these pronouncements. The president of the United States is telling people how bad voting by mail is, and that it should be made illegal, and wants to get rid of that. I mean, these are all like somebody throwing sand in the face or into the works of an election. How do either of you cope with this? How do you all of us are having to deal with this. We talk to voters every day, and we hear the same frustrations. I'm curious how both of you are dealing with, specifically, again, those 3 items: the redistricting, the resetting of the vote by mail cycle, and having the president literally tell people, don't vote by mail, it's not good, when we know it really is. We know it's important. I'll tell you what, I was a pilot, and I would never have been able to vote, or seldom been able to vote, because I was out of town most of my career. Voting by mail is the only way that I could consistently have my voice heard in the democracy. And I know that there are truck drivers, salespeople, folks that are out of town all the time, that they depend on vote by mail to have their voices heard. Anyway, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are, both of you guys. Thank you again for being here.
So when I'm out speaking, I always talk about, the security measures that have been put in place for mail ballot voting. You have to provide a driver's license or the last 4 of your social security number. We can't send a mail ballot to any address that we don't have on file. So if somebody calls and gets a mail ballot and wants it sent to another address, you have to have that address either on file, or that request has to be in writing where we can validate your signature. And, as far as my office is concerned, we try to rise above and stay out of the politics side of it. We are elections administrators. I tell people all the time, I'm not a politician, I'm an administrator. but I'm surrounded by the politics of it. And so we find ourselves typically every year, in a reactionary posture when, the legislature, passes new laws and so forth. And it's what I signed up for. We just have to deal with it. We administer the elections with the laws that are in place at any given time. And we try to educate voters on, here's your methods of voting and here's everything that is the current status of elections right now. And yes, it does change. And it's been changing a lot more lately. But I'm still very proud of what we do and what my team does.
Yeah, I think we try to, I mean, we try to stay out of the politics of it. I think we probably edge more into that than someone in the supervisor's position. But we don't endorse candidates or weigh in on races or anything like that. But we very much try to well, let me just put it this way. So there are a lot of top-down decisions being made, but the buck stops with the local supervisors of elections. They have the authority to run the elections in their county. They still have to work within the laws that are given to them. But ultimately, they're really the stopgap. They're the last line of defense in our perspective. So one way we're looking at this is we just want to have their backs. We want to make sure they feel empowered to stand up to encroaching authority, people trying to usurp their authority, people trying to step in and strong arm them or bully them. And I think honestly, that's where all of us can really do more. One presentation I recently saw by a professor in DC, professor who studies backsliding democracies, democracies sliding into autocracies or authoritarian regimes over decades. He was pointing out how important grassroots movements are to the resistance to those efforts. Basically, there are folks doing policy work, there are people doing lawsuits, just focus on litigation and that kind of thing. And that's sort of, that all needs to happen too, just to make sure people don't go beyond their bounds. But increasingly, it looks like these efforts resisting authoritarian regimes or authoritarian leaders, I guess, is to have these grassroots movements that are bolstering these elected officials or officials, in some cases, as judges, like in Poland. But basically, I love you, Tim, but SOEs are not always the best at defending themselves. They really need those of us in the community going to bat for them and really lifting them up as defenders of democracy and as the sort of the last line of defense. So that's just, I'm kind of getting on a soapbox here, but practically speaking, every time something like this happens, every time a policy from the legislature comes out, we immediately look at how is this going to impact voters and what can we do, both in terms of direct education to voters and in terms of looking at best practices with election officials. What can we encourage them to do? So yeah, I'm sure the supervisor has gotten our letters before where we just have a long list of different things that they can do, whether it be just making sure it's right on the front of their website, making sure they use every means of social media, making sure they're doing mailings, everything that your supervisor is doing. And then I think redistricting is a unique one. That's one where it's there's going to be a lot of litigation if it moves forward, and a lot's going to be in the hands of the courts. At this point, I think it's just fair game for everybody. I would encourage folks to oppose that any way they can, to have your voice heard, whether it be coming up to Tallahassee and speaking in committees, speaking at delegation meetings. It sounds like you just had one there, so maybe that ship sailed. But putting op-eds out, letters to the editor, sending emails, calls, just let your voice be heard that this should not be happening.
Thanks to both of you.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Tim. And we are in the question and answer period, and Janice Moran, our producer, is up.
Hi. My question's kind of for both of you, but probably a little bit more for Tim. And that's in today's world with the violence that's going on, do your people feel safe in what they're doing in their occupation? I mean, what do you guys have to do today to try to make everybody feel safe when they're working at the different sites, the election sites? And are you people getting threats? I mean, has your environment changed Is it worse than it used to be? How do you feel about that?
It has definitely become more volatile. We have seen across the board, you see this threats and violence to elected officials on both sides. You saw what happened, just in the last year, whether it's Minnesota or wherever. And, so yeah, absolutely. We are very cognizant of that. A couple of years ago, we had somebody came into the office and threatened to blow up the office because they were sick and tired of all of the phone calls that they were getting from candidates. And that prompted my predecessor to put up ballistic, bulletproof glass and walls in all of our lobbies to protect our staff, from having that. There's a lot of questions that we are waiting to get some answers on the recent ruling with the open carry. So I think there's a lot of questions, and I think you'll see some stuff with that in the upcoming legislative session as well. But as far as, elected officials, absolutely. I've been told everything from I'm guilty of treason to a death threat to you name it. And you have to look through, and a lot of it's spam, a lot of it's, garbage and stuff. But then there's also some people that are getting legit threats. There's supervisors there's people following their staff home and photographing their license plates and vehicles and so forth. And so it has really driven a lot of valuable experience in the elections industry out. We had probably a record number of new supervisors of elections in the last couple of years, and that's just been a trend across the nation. So for me, I knew exactly what I signed up for. I've got thick skin, but I would be lying if I said it doesn't stress me out and bother me sometimes.
Yeah, anyway, we appreciate the fact that you guys go to work every day, and we do recognize that, and thank you so much for what you do, and for both of you. I'm sure that, the threats, I think, are just really unbelievable as far as how they're trying to attack. It's part of their way of tearing down our system. That's why you have to be able to stand up to that, because otherwise, what would we have? So, thank you. Thanks for answering.
Thanks, Janice. Brad, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not directly, it's not as directly impacting us as it is supervisors of elections and their staff, but I think it's really created a sea change in how we and a lot of the groups we work with in nonpartisan election protection are working. And we've had to just really dig down into, escalation protocols and how we work with law enforcement. And just it's a sea change. It's definitely tainting everything. And the other thing we're having difficulty with, but trying to do desperately, is just track where the bad actors are. Where the people who any incident that happens. In fact, I'll invite any of you to let me know if you see anything happen in Brevard, because we're trying to track those things. And then again, that's another advantage of paying attention to local elections. You might see someone do something that indicates there are people in capacity for bigger, much worse things during, the general election next year. So, we are actively trying to map that out. We're using a lot of different data points, different consultants. It's part of a national effort. It's very serious. Thanks.
And I will say we have excellent relationships with our federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. We communicate with them on a regular basis. If they hear of any threats or anything like that, they notify us immediately, and vice versa. So we definitely, if I want to give them shout out, because they've been really, really great to work with.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Brad. Carol, you're up.
All right, Mr. Bobanek, I just want to thank you for what the things that you do. As a board member of Space Coast Progressive Alliance, I can say that in my years of doing this, I've never heard a bad word about you from anybody in our groups. Any place I've ever been, no matter what side of the aisle they're on, it's always that Mr. Bobanek is great in his job and we need to leave him there. The other thing I was going to ask, you talked about being on the legislative teams, talking to our state legislators. And I'm wondering, do you have much sway with them? Because I can't imagine that you wanted to go from a 2-year mail-in ballot to a 1-year. Do they listen to you, or they just do what they want to do?
They do sometimes, and I will say I spent over 30 hours on phone calls and Zoom calls with members of the Senate Ethics and Elections Committee, the Division of Elections, and our legislative committee just in this last session alone. We have our legislative priorities. We typically don't put out positions when this new legislation comes in. What we do is we work to amend the bills, to reword them to be as palatable as possible. And we did that significantly in this last legislative session. And a lot of the bills were far more extreme than they ended up being when they ultimately passed. I think somebody said one time that the best legislation is one that nobody likes on either side. It's because everybody had to compromise a little bit. And so we have really good relationships. I personally have great relationships with all of our Brevard delegation. They will call me if they get a bill that somebody sends them and says, "Hey, you should run this election integrity bill. Maybe give me a chance to look at it." I'll tell them, "Here's where I think that there's problems. Here's where I think there's improvements," and so forth. So they've been pretty receptive. I would say we work a lot directly with with the Senate Ethics and Elections Committee. That's where most of our work is done. The House doesn't really have a dedicated elections committee. Government operations, I would say, is probably the closest one. But on the Senate side, you have a dedicated committee for ethics and elections, and so we typically focus a lot of our attention on there if we are finding that we're not getting reception from the House members.
Thank you, Tim. Anything to add on that, Brad, or
I would just corroborate. I mean, the Florida Supervisors of Election Association has been incredibly effective at improving bad bills. It used to be we'd see a big election package every other year, usually in the off election years. Ever since 2020, we've seen a pretty massive package every year, which is just not necessary. It's not productive. It's not helpful. It basically overloads the whole system with changes that they're trying to implement and constantly sort of behind on. Even at the state level, the Department of State still has a huge backlog of implementation of rule development, rule development that they have to do, even on, I think, bills dating back to 2021, SB 90. So I can say from experience, the FSE is a very credible and effective voice. Still, there are bills that come with political directives and motivations that are just above everybody's pay grade, and that's like the vote by mail reset that passed in SB 90. That was one of those that they had a lot of political motivations, and that are on the record. It's not hyperbole. It's documented. People have said things. It has been reported on, and you know, a lot of the work in the legislature by the supervisors, I think it's safe to say them as well as us and others, is damage control a lot of times. But every once in a while, you can slip a good idea.
excellent. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Tim. Any follow-up on that, Carol? Okay, thank you. Well, our co-host of All Politics is Local is up next, Suzanne Taylor.
Thank you. I actually have a bunch of questions. So I think the most relevant one right now is from what y'all just said. And I'm wondering, I guess this is more directed to Tim, how, I don't know if you're able to quantify it, but maybe you can explain the process that's involved when the legislature does make a change to the law that filters down to the supervisor of elections. Can you quantify how much time it takes to comply with the law? And I understand that it depends what exactly the law would change, but I don't know if those of us who are lay people have a really good understanding of how much is involved in implementing a change when it happens, because there's always a question raised about, well, this shouldn't be done so close to an election, it said, and how close is too close? Thanks.
And that's a great question. That's something that we regularly give feedback on is, You know, you have these bills that are sometime they're effective upon signing into law by the governor. You have some bills that have effective July or August, or some of them have a delayed implementation until after the election. Every bill is different, but lately it seems to be more and more they are more effective upon signing by the governor. We really push that with the legislature and explain to them we can't just turn things on a dime sometimes. We have to really have time, whether it's IT systems need to be updated to accommodate the new requirements. Our software vendors just can't make massive changes overnight. And so we really push that with them. And we've been pretty successful in that with the legislature. And, there's one thing about arguing policy, but there's also procedure. It's like you can't argue with the fact that I can't turn something around, overnight. In the past, we've always really kind of advocated to not make any major changes in the sessions right before our big elections. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. And so we're constantly communicating with the legislature and our association. We have our own lobbyist who really does a great job advocating for us up there, to explain the ramifications of when these things just happen overnight.
Any other questions there, Suzanne?
No, I'll get back in line.
Okay, no, that's great. Well, as co-host, you can jump the line there if you need to. Karen, our Vice President of Space Coast Progressive Progressive Alliance.
Hi. I want to, first of all, I want to say I agree wholeheartedly with Carol. I have never had a problem. And we've always appreciated Tim. If you ask for something from the office, even before he was the supervisor of elections, he was usually the go-to guy. So I just want to say that we appreciate you. But one of the things that I always try to tell my family, my friends, and all those that have, they're not too sure about the system, they're not sure if their votes are going to count. I always tell them to go to the Vote Brevard and check their status. And after they've checked their status, I tell them you can go back and see where your vote is. That's one of the things I just want to say about this. I don't know if it's statewide or if it's just certain SOE's offices like ours. But I just want to say that's one of the things I always do, and I hope that and then of course your website is very informative. So I just want to mention that that's one of the things I do, and I try to push it out into the community too.
And I appreciate that, Karen. And yes, it's actually a requirement of all 67 supervisors have to have a way to validate the status of your vote. That was passed a number of years ago. So we pretty much all have the same system. I do take pride in our website, and it actually breaks my heart that we're going to actually have to change our website soon. Our vendor that almost every county uses decided that they were going to get out of the web hosting business. And so we are in the process of migrating our website over to a new hosting provider, and it's going to have kind of a new look and feel. But I'm really, really trying to retain as much as I can. Our website is very, very menu heavy, which makes it easy to navigate for some, not for others. But what it makes it difficult to navigate sometimes is on mobile devices. And a lot more people are accessing our website on a mobile device, not on a full screen computer anymore. So we want to make sure that we have a website that's adaptive to any type of device that you might have. So we're going to roll this out after the November election. I didn't want to make any major changes right before the election, but after the November election, sometime before the end of the year, there will be a new votebrevard.gov, but new and improved is what I'd like to say.
Well, thank you, Tim. Brad, you had mentioned a couple of websites or links. Could we get you to put those in the chat or send it to us afterwards, and we'll do that for you?
Sure. Yeah. Might be easiest just to send you an email afterwards.
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent. We'll do that. Thank you. Suzanne.
Back to me. Okay. My next question is, and I'm sorry, again, it's kind of more directed to Tim, I guess, but I know that sometimes, or probably every election, you have some difficulty finding poll workers. I'm wondering if proportionally it's still difficult with such a small election like this. Obviously, you need fewer people if you only have 3 precincts, but you still have 3 full precincts to run. And I'm wondering if poll workers, just like voters, think, well, it's not a big deal, I won't get involved this time. Do you have a similar problem?
No, not at all. We've got a history of very long-standing dedicated poll workers. We rarely have poll worker shortages like you hear about in some other counties, just because they've been around for so long. And yes, we have some that age out, but we kind of have a method of recruiting where the precinct clerks and the precinct techs, the people who run those, we empower them to recruit people in their own precincts, in addition to the efforts that we make. And so, we're always looking for poll workers. And I get a lot of times I get calls of like, hey, I checked a box to say I wanted to be a poll worker and you didn't call me. I'm like, I don't have the need. And I got a pool of over 1,000 poll workers. So we certainly are covered for the 3 precincts that we have for this upcoming election. It was maybe a little bit more challenging, the special elections that are not planned that we had in the earlier this year. Even then, it wasn't as bad. Only because we don't staff those up as high as we would for a presidential election. And so, when you have those, especially when you got something in June going into the summer, people have vacations. We didn't have as many poll workers as available as we normally would have, but we really didn't have any problem staffing any of the polling places. So we are actually, really good with that.
Very good. And I was just going to ask another quick question. I see someone did raise their hands. Are all the supervisors of elections in Florida elected, or
Yes,
some appointed?
they are all elected. That just recently changed. In 2024, Miami-Dade was the remaining county that wasn't. It was appointed, and that they had their first election for their constitutional officers.
Were they appointed by the governor or by a local board of some kind?
Miami-Dade was appointed by the Miami-Dade County government. And Miami-Dade's a very different kind of government. It's a city county, but they were appointed, but they're elected now. So all 67 are elected.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Suzanne. I know I'm going to mispronounce your first name here. So, Marissa, if you could take yourself off mute and ask your question.
It's Marilza.
Marilza.
But she
Thank
still
you.
needs to take herself off mute.
All right. Well, as she's trying to get off of mute, I was curious, and Carol had mentioned this earlier, Tim, is what was your question to the at the delegation, since you had 3 minutes of their undivided attention? What was your burning issue that you had brought up?
So, our association hasn't voted yet on our official list of our legislative priorities. And so, being an executive board member, I didn't want to push anything. We're actually having a meeting tomorrow to try to finalize some of that stuff. But what I did was I thanked them, like I always do, for their service. I thanked them for being receptive to our changes. I asked them that, again, if you receive any elections related bills, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call me. And they promise you they do. I'll have senators or representatives who are getting ready to walk into a committee meeting and say, hey, tell me if I should, tell me what you think I should do on this amendment here. Is this good or bad? What's your thoughts on it? It might not necessarily have an impact, but they do value my opinion. And every year when I go to Tallahassee at least twice a year during the session. One of the weeks we have a legislative days for all of the supervisors of elections so that we can go and advocate for what's going on. And it's challenging because sometimes we've gone up there and there's no elections bills. And then suddenly on our last day, we're getting ready to leave, a 120-page election bill drops out of nowhere. So we try to time it a little bit later so that we can be there when some of the elections bills. And I think that there's 1 or 2 already that are out there, candidate related. I think somebody is going to file something for the driver's license. It's just kind of keeping our ear to the ground on what's the temperature of the legislature.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. And before I turn it over to our next question, I do want to say that, as good leaders, typically good leaders hire good people. And I wanted to take advantage of the floor right now and acknowledge Kim for her leadership over the years as well. and it's your team. You know, you're only as good as your team, and you've done a good job with that. And thank you, Kim, for being here with Tim tonight.
I could not do it without them. I like to say they make me look good every day, and they are the absolute best staff that I could ever ask for. But I did neglect to mention on the delegation, I did bring up the driver's license number issue, and wanting to get a resolution to that.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. Brad, did you have something to say before I turn over to the next question?
I would just add that, yeah, I have seen some language. There is a bill on the driver's license issue, at least one. I think there might be several coming. And then there's several bills that won't go anywhere, but there are things that people should know about. One is a state voting rights act. And this is basically a wish list of things and an attempt by progressive organizations to exercise the muscles of proactively looking at ways to improve the statutes from a pro voter perspective. So I don't think anybody has any illusion that this bill will pass, but it's been filed the last several years. Each year it gets updated. It has what's typically included in state voting rights acts, which are basically stepping in where the federal government hasn't in terms of back in 2012, the Federal Voting Rights Act was gutted with the Shelby v. Holder decision, and states have been stepping in and passing their own acts. Ours goes a lot further than any of the others, and it's State Voting Rights Act. It repeals a lot of bad stuff that's been happening, and it has some kind of pie in the sky, but very hopeful, optimistic things like same-day voter registration, automatic voter registration, and things like that. So we don't look at it even as a messaging bill as much as a movement building bill. It's just something to be aware of. A lot of good people are working on that. And it'll be filed again shortly. And there's also a bill dealing with rights restoration that I believe it might have already come out. Again, this is another one that I don't think has a chance of passing, but it's a very important issue. Just making sure there's some sort of resource. I think this bill creates a database where folks would, be able to, both us, returning citizens, supervisors will be able to use this resource to determine if someone's eligible to vote, and they would be, especially former convicted felons who are returning citizens who served their time wouldn't risk being arrested again.
Excellent. Thank you, Brad. I've been informed that we have success. Our next question is off of mute now. Go ahead, Melissa.
Yes. Okay, I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
My question is for Supervisor Bobanek. I noticed at the last election, we had many people that went to the wrong precinct. And I wonder, was it just an impression that I got, or is it a really high percentage of the votes that are not counted because of that? And if it is so, is there anything that can be done to help that?
So just to clarify, first off, we avoid at all costs moving voters in polling places, but sometimes it's unavoidable. I regularly lose polling places. They don't want to serve anymore, or their building is under construction, or something's happening. And so when we move a polling place, we always send out a new voter information card to every single voter. We put a notice on that card that says, your polling place has moved. Here it is. It's also on the sample ballot that we send to the voters. This is where your polling place is. We put it on social media. We do as much as we can, but unfortunately, people ignore sometimes what we send them in the mail. So the Florida law mandates that on election day, you have to vote in your assigned polling place. And the reason for that is the ballots, the questions, the candidates that appear in your ballot are specific to your residence address and the precinct and district that you're assigned. So if a voter was allowed to vote at the wrong polling place, they would be entitled, they would be voting for people that aren't in their districts, that aren't their representative, that they're not entitled to vote for. So that's why that law is in place. Now, early voting, you can go to any early voting site because we print your ballot on demand and be able to print what is your specific ballot. But election day, our office is following the law on that one there, and I don't see anything on that anyway changing at this point.
So did we lose a lot of votes because of that?
I don't know that we lost votes. I mean, we always direct the voters to the correct polling place. When they check in, it'll automatically tell them, hey, you're at the wrong polling place. But again, if a voter shows up at 6:55 p.m., 5 minutes before the polls close, and they're at the wrong polling place, ultimately they're not going to make it to their correct polling place. But I see that as a very, very low percentage of the votes cast. I don't hear that very often.
Okay, thanks.
Hmm. You're muted, Dan.
Yeah, I'm new at this. Before I go ahead and turn it over to our speakers for some action items and closing remarks, I was going to lean to our co-host Suzanne for her closing remarks.
Okay, thank you. I guess first I want to do like a little public service announcement with just some information. One is I would note that this coming Monday, October 6th, is the last day to register to vote for the November elections that we've talked about in Indy Atlantic and Melbourne Beach. So if you're in Indy Atlantic and Melbourne Beach and you have not registered, please go do it on Monday, I think by 5 p.m. Again, we have the candidate forums that are coming up. That's to my mind, one of the best ways to get information directly from candidates. So we try to do that every time, and we have those two scheduled. And I'll give you our website in a moment where all the information that I'm going to mention is on. I'd also point out we have a website called vote411.org, which is a national website. You put in your address, it'll bring up your ballot when we get closer to an election, and it'll tell you exactly what's on your ballot. And we solicit answers from candidates in their own words on specific questions, and we put them verbatim in Vote 411. So if you can't get to a forum or your question doesn't get asked at a forum, you can look at Vote 411 and hopefully your question will be answered there by the candidates who choose to answer. If there's some questions answered by some candidates and some not answered, it's because the candidates chose not to answer. And I suggest that that tells you a lot of information as well. Pointing out very quickly, this Saturday, October 4th, we have a redistricting day of action. If you're interested in that issue, please look at the website and find out about it. We have a regular monthly meeting Saturday, October 11th, which will be about sustainability and recycle Brevard. I encourage everybody to go to our website, which is lwv-spacecoast.org. If you just put in League of Women Voters, Space Coast, you'll get to our website. There are a couple different ways to get there. You go to national, it'll bring you down to our local. And I guess the last point I do want to make is to emphasize something that Tim already said. And by my count, when I went to votebrevard.org today, which I love, I'm sorry, .gov. I always say the wrong ending. I apologize, .gov. I love the website. It has so much good information. I'm very sad to hear it's going to change, but hopefully I'll get used to the new one. But by my count, there were 18 elections where the candidates were unopposed for November 4th election, which means voters have no choice whatsoever in who's going to be in those positions and running those governmental entities. There were only 2 contested elections for a total of 3 seats. Melbourne Beach has 4 people running for 2 seats, and Indy Atlantic has 2 people running for 1 seat. So only 3 contested seats out of 18 plus 3, 21. There are already 11 candidates are declared for the 2026 election, which has a primary in August. So I would encourage everybody to be aware and I guess get prepared. That's what the league is trying to do now. Get prepared for the big election coming up in 2026 while still trying to encourage people to vote now. So I definitely want to say thank you to Tim and to Brad for appearing and answering our questions and providing the information. We always are interested in learning more. The league is always trying to get the vote out too. You're right. It's easier to register people. It's really hard to figure out how to get them out to vote. And we're constantly trying to come up with new ways, especially with young people. And it's just a constant question we never have a good answer to. But thank you very much for appearing and giving us information and helping us try to do that.
Thank you, President of the League of Women's Voters, Suzanne Taylor. I also noticed that we had another board member from the Space Coast Progressive Alliance thought she could sneak in without an announcement or recognition, and that's Barbara Bingner. joined us a little late. And so thank you for being here tonight as well, Barbara. We had some technical difficulties at the onset, but it looks like we've recovered from that, and we appreciate everyone's patience as we work through those. And as a reminder, we will have this recording out on our YouTube channel for Space Coast Progressive Alliance. With that said, I'd like to be able to ask the two speakers tonight to give us some closing remarks and some action items, if at all possible. Thank you. Who's first?
I can jump in. Tim's been talking a lot. So one, thank you all for joining us tonight. I mean, basically, as with every election, just try to register as many people as you can, educate your neighbors and family, and get people out to vote, and try to make it fun. I think it's sort of a dark time. We're seeing a lot of dark, depressing, scary things in the news, and people need hope. They need to remember that we still have a democracy that's functioning and working just fine. They need to participate. If you do see anything that isn't just fine, in addition to communicating with your supervisor of elections, I would just make you aware that 866 our vote, the nonpartisan election protection hotline, is up year round. So that is a place you can report things you see, and that'll go to attorneys and to advocates in the state like myself, and we'll, either talk to your supervisor or, law enforcement or whoever needs to be triaged to figure out how to address the thing if it's not being addressed. The other thing I would just, ask you, and I'll send you more information on this, Daniel, is if you could weigh in on this EAC petition, we'd really appreciate it. It's, very unseemly, unnecessary, and it sets a precedent for bad legislation at the state level as well. So it's something that we really just need. It doesn't need to even be a lot. It could be as simple as a sentence, just a lot of comments on this rulemaking. And while I've got the mic, I did forget to mention two legislative things that are worth paying attention to that are a little more hopeful. One, last session, we almost were able to move. So, Florida has been hammered with hurricanes during elections for several cycles now. And one thing we're interested in seeing is more flexibility for supervisors to provide for their voters, especially displaced voters due to storms when those storms happen. In some ways, the state's method of dealing with these is pretty good, but some of that could be automated so that supervisors, in our opinion, could react more quickly. So, Tim, I'd love to talk to you more about that. But Bill almost passed the finish line last session and got kind of ripped out of the bill, a bigger bill right at the last moment. The other thing that I think has potential, a good thing that has potential to move this session is legislation that would move audits to pre-certification. That sounds super wonky. Certification is kind of like the final blessing on the results. And right now, our post-election audits happen after certification. So there does seem to be momentum to put the audit before certification, to expand those races it would apply to, and ideally fund all the supervisors in every county in the state to have software like you have in Brevard that allows supervisors to do this efficiently. So that's something where the devil will be in the details. They had some language last session that wasn't all that great, but we'll see if they do that. Anyway, so I just wanted to let you know it isn't all doom and gloom. There are some positive things that might happen this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Tim?
Okay, so on what Brad was talking about, I spent probably the majority of my time on that changing that post-election audit to a pre-certification, and they had called it a vote validation. And again, we get this ballot language, and then we try to work with it as best. And I think it confused a lot of people, even the election integrity groups. When we're trying to push something that's going to force everybody to do 100% audit and do it before we do certification. And in addition to that, have it count as the recount. I've already, when I'm running my ballots, we run the ballots through our certified voting machines. We then run them through the certified audit system. I have done a recount by the time the last ballot is cast. All we're doing, we're counting the ballots on both systems during the mail ballots time period. Early voting, the voters cast the ballots in person. The very next morning, we are running them through the audit system so that all we have is left is election day. When we had that West Melbourne City Council race, and we spent all of the hours running through it, first off, it took us longer to find the ballots, the West Melbourne ones mixed in all of the mail ballot and early voting, than it did to actually count them. We could have pushed a button, had a report, and said, "Here's the results. It validates the certified voting system. Here's our recount and audit." And we could have done all of that before certification. So I'm a big advocate for our clear ballot system, which is what we use. And I'm not advocating a vendor per se. It's the one vendor that's supported, but we feel like if we can get that pre-certification vote validation audit system approved, then it'll bring in other competition and have other options like we do with the voting systems. I want to thank Suzanne for reminding everybody about our book closing deadline. But the other important deadline to remember is October 23rd is the deadline to request a mail ballot to be sent to you. So if you haven't requested a mail ballot, you still got plenty of time. But October 23rd by 5 p.m. is the deadline. And if you live in any of the two cities or Barefoot Bay, the ballots drop today. You could have them as early as tomorrow or by Saturday, I would expect. So you should be able to see those in your inbox very soon. And I just want to close with what I think is the most impactful statement that you can really make about elections, and that is elections are decided by those who choose to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Brad. Yes, if you can come off of mute and give everyone give them a hand there, that'd be great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much for being here for us, all of you.
Yes, thank you very much. All politics are local. It'll be seen on our YouTube channel for the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. And our next general meeting for the Space Coast Progressive Alliance will be November 6th. You can check that out on our scpaflorida.com website. With that, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you again to the League of Women's Voters and Suzanne Taylor and team tonight for being here. And everyone have a good night. Thank you.
Have a good
Thanks,
night. Thank
everyone.
you.
Good night.
Thank you.